do you actually start producing a song? Like when you open up your DAW and it's completely blank, how do you go from that to beginning a new production so you're primed for a smooth process? That's what we're gonna talk about. First off, there's not a right or wrong answer. It's ultimately gonna be whatever is best for your own personal workflow, but I'm gonna be sharing several ideas regarding production that I'm like 99% sure one of them will resonate with you. Ultimately, there are really three different starting points. Either you have a song that is already written and you're gonna produce that song, or you're gonna be starting with a song that is not yet written, or you will actually write and produce together or in the same process. In other words, some producers are essentially going to produce an entire instrumental with no melody, no lyrics, no vocals, add those vocals later, which is called top lining. In other words, they are composing a production that is not a pre-written song. Big name producers like Zedd do this. It's more common in the EDM and hip hop world, whereas pop, rock, folk, and other genres like that, they're usually gonna start with a song that is already written and then produce that based on that song, or in a lot of cases, that third option, which is they are going to be writing the song right alongside the producer in the studio. So they are writing and producing at the same time. And I have done all three of these methods. So that alone becomes three different methods of starting a song. Are you starting with a song already written, or are you building an arrangement that will have a top line added, or are you doing them together? So let's actually talk about how to start regardless of which one of these you're gonna go with. First idea I wanna share with you is what I call non-linear producing. Now this is producing a song linearly with every instrument. Now here's what I mean. So let's say you have the structure of the entire song down and you know what you wanna do with it. Then linear producing would be recording every instrument from the start of the song all the way through and getting that entire instrument finished. So if you're starting with guitars, you're gonna record all of your guitars from beginning to end to get the entire song produced with just guitars to lay the foundation down with guitars. Then you would move on to the next instrument. That might be keyboards, and you're gonna record or produce all of your keys from beginning to end. So now you have all the guitars and now you have all the keys done, and you're basically gonna build it up from there until the song is fully produced and you're adding individual instruments along the way. The challenge a lot of producers are gonna have with this is that you really need to have a clear arrangement that you have predetermined to do this. So this is actually a lot more common with bands and productions where the arrangement is very clear. You know exactly what each element is going to be before you actually start the recording and production. So this is great when you have a crystal clear idea of where you're going. You already know how every instrument's gonna work together with all the other instruments. Now I recently did this on a track of mine called Cloud 9, which is more of an electronic rock production. I produced all the drums start to finish, bass start to finish, guitars start to finish. You get the point. It was linear. Now the opposite of this would be what I call non-linear producing. Now this is focused on producing in sections as opposed to building the entire song out linearly. Again, neither is right or wrong. I've done both and I find that each has its own unique feeling as a producer. I will say that most of the time I tend to prefer non-linear producing, which is what I'm going to tell you about right now. So non-linear would mean that you are going to produce each section of the song in its entirety. So rather than just putting all the guitars in the whole song and then moving on to the next instrument, non-linear would mean you would actually build up the entire arrangement and soundscape of all of the individual sections of the song. So you might just build out a verse entirely with, drums, bass, synths, guitars, etc. So it's essentially completely done before moving on to a different part of the song. Now, one of the reasons I like doing this is because it gives me a really good sense of how a section sounds, and I can then work on other sections to either match that section or contrast that section to keep the track interesting. Once you have an entire section produced, you now have a really clear vision of how it sounds. You have the sound design, you have the various elements, and you're gonna know how the rest of that track might sound in relationship to the other section. So if you produce all of verse 1 in its entirety, soundscape and all, now verse 2, I can think, you know what, I wanna do all these things different than what I did in verse 1, and that's gonna help contrast it. So this works really great if you need to get a snapshot of the feeling your production is gonna have without having a super clear idea of the arrangement. I use this more when I need to try out a bunch of different ideas and get a sense for what I'm even going for. But with that said, I almost always have a broadly created roadmap outlined in terms of what I want the production to be, and I highly recommend this. I know some of the old school producers really don't like this method, and since historically music was recorded on tape, it wasn't even possible, but this is commonly used in the industry today. So if you don't like this idea, then just don't use it. But just because you don't think you'll like it doesn't mean that you won't if you actually tried it or that it's wrong. I've done this method on hundreds of productions, and like I said, this tends to be the process that resonates the most with my typical workflow. And the third way is essentially writing the song and producing the song together. Now this may either be linear or non-linear. In other words, you might end up writing the lyrics and melodies as quickly as possible to get a scratch track nailed out, so then you can start fleshing out the production linearly, or more often than not, this would likely be non-linear. You're gonna be writing individual pieces of the song. So you might wanna hash out the hook of the song first and maybe even start producing that portion of the song before you have a verse written. So I hope that you can see from this that there is no right or wrong way, but ultimately it comes down to finding a workflow you find that resonates with you and you like. I've written and produced songs together where it was very non-linear and other times that were quite linear. When I did my collaboration with songwriter Forrest Whitehead, for example, I was basically entirely responsible for building up the production while Forrest was creating melodies and lyrics, and we were each working on our own pieces and would come together to fit them together. So in a way, I was building a production for him to top line on, but we were also still working in the same room, working on it. It was somewhat of a fusion of all the things that we're talking about here. So to recap, there are really three ways of producing a song: linear, non-linear, or what we'll call writing and producing together. So we have that down, but what about the practical side of where to begin once you choose which method you want to go with? This is where there are some good common practices you should know about. First off, typically most producers are going to build from the ground up. This means starting with the low frequency elements and then building the production up vertically to the higher frequency elements. But before then, I almost always build out a very simple scratch track of the song. This could be just piano and one lead vocal if the song is already written, or it could literally just be piano chords to let me know the progression and the structure of the track if it's something that I'm building for a top line to be added. Now, since inevitably there might be some people who don't know what scratch tracks are in the comments, scratch tracks are just simple recordings of the song that will eventually be scratched and re-recorded. A lot of times it'll be a scratch vocal, scratch piano, guitar, whatever other element makes sense. It's essentially just there to help guide the production. All in all of this is so much easier to build a production up if you have a bit of a guide. That's why scratch tracks are so valuable. And that's also why having a production plan is really helpful. Speaking of that, I have an entire workshop I created that is totally free, where I actually go really deep on not just this topic that we're talking about here, but the entire process I use from start to finish in my own music. So if you want to check that out, I have a link in the description of this video, but wait till the end to go there because I still have some value for you. Once you have a scratch track, it is way easier to begin building the rest of the production around that. So I might have just a piano and a vocal, then the next place I'd likely go is either drums or bass. Again, starting with the low elements first and then building upward. And this is regardless of whether you are producing linearly or non-linearly. This is really standard practice to start with drums and bass and then build upward. Since I know some people are going to take that as a black and white statement, I'm not saying this is the only way, but I'm saying this is a standard practice. So if you want to try other ways, go for it. In fact, a lot of times I will start with more of the keyboard instruments since I'm a pianist myself and feel more comfortable doing that. So once you have those fundamental elements put down, then you would ideally move to whatever primary elements you have next. So that might be rhythm guitars, piano, keyboard, synths, etc. You choose. So you can start to get the meat of the production filled in. As you work, you are typically building upwards. In other words, in most cases, you are saving any vocals or any of the higher elements till the very end. And that does raise a little bit of a question. When do you record vocals? Like I said, in most cases, you're saving the vocals till the very end, but this is not a hard rule. There's nothing preventing you from producing all of your vocals somewhere in the middle, but in most cases it is much easier to produce vocals once you have the whole production done. It's much easier for vocalists to sing when they can hear the song as it's actually going to sound rather than singing over top of just a shell of a production. I've worked with a lot of singers and I can confidently tell you that if you give them a raw production to perform to, then their performance will probably not be as good as if you give them a fully produced track to sing with. A lot of getting killer vocals is psychology and making sure your singer is really comfortable and feeling it. And if they're not, it's kind of a recipe for disaster. Along the entire process, I'm editing everything I produce. So as I add each element, it's being polished and it's going to sound how I want it to sound. I'm not a big fan of waiting till the end to edit everything. I do it along the way, and that's a combination of quantizing MIDI, adjusting piano roll velocities, and editing any real-time audio that I record to lock it into the pocket. Something else I talk about a lot in my course Producer Accelerator is that you should always start where you feel most confident, and that's not just talking about what instrument to start with, but also what part of the song to start with too. So if you're feeling like you are unsure of what you want in a particular section, then don't start there. You only have limited creative resources when you are making a song, so save those and use them on the sections that you feel the absolute best about. I'm a really big advocate of getting quick wins, and what I mean by that is you should really focus on the aspects of the song you feel the absolute best about right away so you feel really good. In other words, do not start with the part of the song that you know is going to be really hard or tricky, because you will inevitably exhaust your creative energy on that and you won't have anything left for the parts you are excited about. Save it, work on the parts you feel great about, start feeling good, have that happy feeling of like, yes, this is sounding great, and that will often pour out into the hard parts and actually make them easier. So like I said, if you want to go way deeper on this, then you really need to go through my production roadmap workshop. I recently got this DM right here about the workshop here, so I'm confident that you're going to get a ton of value from it. We'll see you there.